All right. Hello, dear viewers. Hello, YouTube. I would like to present my presentation on the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. I'll show it on my screen over here. Uh, so this is a novel from Edgar Allan Poe. It is a horror novel. It deals with this very long ship narrative. Above all, the protagonists are trying to reach the South Pole. It is a novel of exploration, and it does contain a lot of graphic violence, lots of these elements that are very dark, and I'll be talking about these as well. But first of all, I would like to, as this is a course on the unconsciousness in 19th century literature at Charles University, I would like to start with the theoretical instruments of psychology, especially Sigmund Freud and Carl Gustav Jung's theories on especially the unconscious, well, the unconscious that you all probably know very well about. Then on Jung and his shadow archetype, and Jung's as well Jung's collective unconscious. It's another theory of Carl Gustav Jung. So we will be dealing with two psychological theories from Jung and one from Freud. But both of these and all three of these are very much interconnected. They relate to each other. The Jung's theories are essentially some sort of structure built on Freud originally, and then they parted ways. I will be using as to procure to myself this theoretical basis, this bedrock. I will be using a review of personality theories by Victor J. Drapela. He's actually from Prague. He graduated at Charles University, I suppose, a theology degree. I'm not sure. He then emigrated into the U.S., where he became a professor at Florida, in Florida at a certain university. So that will serve as my theoretical background. And his book on personality theories, called A Review of Personality Theories, is an excellent exemplar of a very useful book in psychology, because it essentially offers you insight into different theories, but it's not too detailed. It's very much pragmatic, very useful introductory guide, and I use it a lot with uh, my literary attempts at interpretation. So as we can see, hopefully on my screen as I'm recording this, we should start, or at least we should look at Shadow Archetype by Jung. It's on page 30 of the edition I have from 2011. And I'm not really putting here the theories of Freud, because at this point in the middle of the semester, you all probably have a very functional knowledge of id, ego, and superego. So I'm not going to do that. So I'm only including the shadow archetype from the review of personality theories. I would read it out. I'm not sure whether that's really necessary. Maybe you all will have already read it by the time I got here. The shadow is an archetype that represents the animal side in every individual. So it's this id element. This is how he builds on Freud. The tendency towards the primitive forms of life typical of our animal ancestors. Jung in 1966 believed that every human being is wearing a veneer of civilization, so that might be the superego, over a brute that hides within him. That's the visceral, the animalistic power of the id, the source of energy that Freud was also talking about. Now, yet, the shadow should be accepted as an integral part of personality and treated as one's other side. All right. You cannot exactly divide or one more second. Is my mic all right? My mic functioning? That's what I was thinking a lot about, and I wasn't sure. So you cannot exactly how shall I say separate the id, the visceral drive, the drive of energy from from the personality of a person. It will always be there. It's one's other side. It will appear in perhaps situations that are in the liminal situations that are critical to survival. In these situations, the shadow archetype might appear. As the visible shadow in bright sunlight emphasizes the realness and plasticity of human being, so does the archetypal shadow add realness and plasticity to the psyche. The thing about Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, and his narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, which we'll see in a short while, is that Poe understood this plasticity of psyche. It actually shows a lot in how people change, because people do change under pressure, right? I mean, suffering changes you. So this is the plasticity of psyche, as I understand it from the book that I was reading. That human mind is an extremely dynamic entity. It changes all the time, and the shadow sometimes appears in these critical situations. So the shadow may be seen as Jung's closest parallel to Freud's instinctual side of personality. So I'm not sure whether we can equalize it with id, but I think they're very close to this instinctual drive. And the second big theory we'll be dealing here with in this short presentation is the collective unconscious, another theory of Carl Gustav Jung. And again, I'm taking it directly out of A Review of Personality Theories by the fantastic Victor J. Drapela. I really do like the book. I encourage you to get it. I can always help you to get it. So the psyche has inherited in this part of the unconscious. It is linked to the past and compromises in itself the psychic life of our ancestors, right back to the earliest beginnings. So what Jung essentially is saying here is that we remember things instinctually, somehow deep inside. We know what to do in different situations of life. For example, we might call it intuition, right? We might call it a cultural learning. I mean, we know what to do, and when we, for example, meet a person and something is not right, etwas stimmt nicht, something just doesn't fit. It might even be the feeling of uncanny. Get out from this person, for example. So it is this deep feeling that Jung considers to be a knowledge that is given to us by our ancestors. All right, I carry on. The collective unconscious is the deepest common denominator of all humans, by which a person's mind widens out and merges into the mind of mankind, where we are all the same. The collective unconscious contains experiences of both human and animal ancestors, some of them disturbing, others satisfying. Now, this is a theory that is very much has been and was under attack by modern psychology, and I don't want to get into this. I mean, it is a theory after all. We are not that determined, I believe, by our ancestral experience. I mean, it's questionable how can even that transfer? Does it transfer over genes? The genes really determine how we think? This is really not the point of the presentation anymore, but it bears looking into, and it's a good thing to look at it critically. In contrast with Freud's theory, which perceives the unconscious as a potential threat to the person's conscious ego, Jung presents this collective unconscious as a potential source of wisdom in human life. Again, questionable, but usable and interesting for a very good literary interpretation. For our reasons, this is great. To explain Jung's theory of ancestral influences on the psyche, Jacobi proposed the structure of psychic family tree. At the very bottom lies the unfathomable, the central energy. So this is very this kind of shall I say, terminology is very general. I mean, we don't exactly know what hides behind the central energy. Maybe if we looked into it a bit deeper. But then again, this is enough for our interpretation needs. So this unfathomable, the central energy out of which the individual psyche has been differentiated. So we grow out of our ancestral tree of spiritual energy, right? This central energy flows to the psyche through a series of ancestral layers. The layers include animal ancestry and prehistoric, as well as historic human ancestry, the individual ethnic group, nation, tribe, and family. As a great river deposits sediments from many regions in its delta, so does the central energy transmit experiences of many ancestral generations to the psyche. This is the important thing for us. The most important thing from the theory of collective unconscious for our current interpretation. The natives on the isle, as you will see as well, were able to recognize that a certain thing that is the white bird is the harbinger of something very, very bad. And this is exactly what Jung is saying here. It's energy that transmits experience of many ancestral generations to the psyche. So this is something that the people before you had to go through. They had to burn their hands on that very negative experience, and thanks to or owing to their sacrifice, to their learning by doing, owing to that, you were able to avoid dangerous situations. So, for example, I don't know, don't put your hand on a hot stove, right? That's instinctual. If you put your hand over a hot stove, then you feel that the heat is increasing, and something tells you, no, don't do this because it's going to hurt you. It's essentially that. At least I think. Please, I invite the discussion of my imperfect knowledge. Please tell me if you don't think this is the case in the comments, for example, on YouTube, or even on the Facebook group, or during the seminar tomorrow. So the culmination of this process is the emergence of an individual person, and this individual person is the circle over here. It consists of the white area, which is the collective unconscious. This is all the ancestral experience. It's almost like a hat if we look from up down, right? So this is the collective unconscious, and the dotted area is the personal unconscious. It's the unique part of you, according to Jung's theory of collective unconscious and personality as it is in itself. So the black area is the conscious. This is something that's shared with Freud, that Jung and Freud shared with each other, is that really what we perceive, what we are aware of perceiving, what we think we know about ourselves is a very, very small part of what we really are. We do not know the great majority of contents of our psyche. That's the unconscious. That's the theory of unconscious by Freud. But then again, I don't want to get into it in the middle of the semester. So this to say, what we'll be doing, we'll get to these images later. And here is the diagram of collective unconscious process. So you can see the sediments, the layers of experience that are coming from, there's the central energy, maybe soul, we don't know, it's very enigmatic. So the soul energy is traveling upwards to a person, which is the pinnacle of the so-called evolution that Jung is proposing. So you start with animal. If you fall from a precipice, you'll break your leg. Don't do that. The prehistoric ethnic group, so that could be traditions, that could be people that you should avoid. That's already brought in by your ancestors. National group, your language, for example, tribal group, family unit. We do not talk to these people, for example. I'm not actually quite sure what examples could be here. Maybe you could provide some of the examples. Maybe that could be the second question here in this short presentation, to provide me or the whole seminar with the examples of different layers that constitute this collective unconscious, but not to dwell too much on theory. I made a mistake that I didn't take care of measuring my time. Let's go to the actual work that we want to dissect today. It's the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket by Edgar Allan Poe. Now, this is a travel novel. It's a sailing novel. It's about sailors that are traveling to the South Pole. Written by Edgar Allan Poe. What could go wrong, right? I'll be looking at the novel from um, several separate angles. And there should be one more point to that overview, and that should be the effect writing of Edgar Allan Poe. And I will add that to the first point that we will get into immediately now. All right. So, superego and ego weakening and psychological dynamism. So, I don't really intend to give you a lot of biographical info on Edgar Allan Poe and the information about the composition that we could start with, because I think that will be provided to you in the seminar. So I want to really get into the interpretation here, because we're running out of time. So superego and ego weakening, psychological dynamism, and Poe's affect writing. What Poe does in the novel is that he works implicitly. He doesn't know how to call these things, but he very much understands what a superego and ego is, and how ego works as the engine or the mediator between the it and superego. And he weakens ego. He knows how to weaken ego, which is an interesting naturalistic experiment, because the sailors find themselves, as they're traveling to the South Pole, in a very unenviable position where the mutiny kills basically most of the crew, and the sailors are left only 4 on the brig, only 4 people on the ship. Half the ship is flooded. There's simply no way to get to the food, and they are spending a very, very long time on the ship with no food available, only 4 of them, and only rainwater. They don't have anything to drink, which is a situation that will weaken the ego, which is something that Poe is working here with. This is the situation of the sailors, portrayed by a picture, essentially dismal. It's squalor. It's completely bad situation, right? So what Poe does, he uses his affect writing to create this effect of despair. So the gnawing hunger, which I know experienced, was nearly unsupportable, and I felt myself capable of going to any lengths in order to appease it. With my knife, I cut off a small portion of the water trunk and endeavored to eat it, but found it utterly impossible to swallow a single morsel, although I fancied that some little alleviation of my suffering was obtained by chewing small pieces of it and spitting them out. Towards night, my companions awoke, one by one, each in an indescribable state of weakness and horror, brought on by the wine whose fumes had now evaporated. Do you see how he's working with the language? This is a very, very these are the very powerful words. Words that have very strong energy. Words that are that only have the most ghastly connotations, and they're all over the place. I mean, I was actually depressed when I was reading the book. I had no idea why, because I'm normally a fairly sanguine person. I'm optimist. I'm mostly happy. But as I was reading the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym over, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was noticing on myself that I'm so down. Nothing really makes sense anymore. I was in quite a state of depression, and I had no idea why this is happening. And turns out that as I finished the book, the state vanished, and it was because of the words that Poe chooses to use. They're very powerful, very, very how shall I say, magnetic, words. They have a strong aura, strong air. So I can see that ego is really weakened. It's insupportable. It's utterly impossible. Suffering is omnipresent. Ego as a mediating instrument in a personality. We don't have the Freud here. That could have been good, but so essentially, ego is being very weakened. Now, superego. What's happening here? If people go hungry, then, and this is really coming from Abraham Maslow. If people go hungry, superego starts to get corrupted, starts to fall apart until it dies. And that's the death of superego nearing the middle of the book, when they haven't eaten for extreme amount of time. They were drinking very small amounts of small amounts of rainwater. The situation is absolutely dreadful, and ego as a captain, ego doesn't really disintegrate. I mean, ego is still there. Ego is functional mediator, but superego is completely kaput, doesn't work. And tranquil and cool ego suggest cannibalism, because you need to appease the id, and that's when the shadow appears. Remember Jungian definition. It's really it's that virulent, visceral, animalistic drive that appears, the shadow. So the cannibalism is suggested. We can skip that quote. Affect writing, I touched on it already, as we'll see in the next brutal excerpt. Let's look at the personification of things, metaphors, but very dark words as prey, abject, pitiable, tear, knocking violently, awful speculation, a pure stream of consciousness. This will be in the very next excerpt. That will be the third question. I'll get back to that. All right, I wanted to also stress the ability to understand psychological dynamism, but we've already stressed that. So the situation is that the Parker, one of the sailors, named called Parker, wants to, he's adamant on suggesting the cannibalist approach, and our narrator, Arthur Gordon Pym, is given the task to make the splinters and just draw and make a what, so whoever draws the shortest stick will be essentially eaten. And this is what he's to do. He's to devise these splinters. He's to make this small contraption. So, and this is his internal monologue as he's preparing the death machine. So every particle of that energy which had so long buoyed me up departed like feathers before the wind. So superego is gone. It's whatever is left is just ego, leaving me a helpless prey to the most abject and pitiable terror, which could be id. I could not, at first, even summon up sufficient strength to tear and fit together the small splinters of wood, my fingers absolutely refusing their office, and my knees knocking violently against each other. He's trembling. That guy is completely. He's at mercy of his fear. Id overtook. Ego is desperately trying to mediate this. My mind ran over rapidly 1,000 absurd projects, rapid going through them, by which to avoid becoming a partner in the awful speculation. So they draw the lots, and Parker draws the shortest. So the guy who suggested it actually gets eaten. And surprisingly stoically, he accepts his fate. This is a very interesting question. Could be, why is Parker so calm? Why is he so tranquil? Is it because his ego is so good at mediating the situation? Is it because he's used to living without superego? Could be an interesting question. I recovered from my swoon in time to behold, because the narrator, Arthur, faints because it was just so tense that he didn't draw the shorter lot. So I recovered from my swoon in time to behold the consummation of the tragedy in the death of him who had been chiefly instrumental in bringing it about. He made no resistance, whatever, and was stabbed in the back by Peters, when he instantly fell dead. I must not dwell upon the fearful repast which immediately ensued. Now, the fearful repast is actually a very interesting word. Repast is a feast, a feeding rather. It's this kind of feeding, a ghoulish eating. It doesn't really have good connotations, if you ask me. I shouldn't be laughing that much, maybe, but I'm a positive person. So I must not dwell upon the fearful repast which immediately ensued. Such things may be imagined, but words have no power to impress the mind with the exquisite horror. Exquisite horror. Exquisite. This is poetry. This is a deathly, ghastly, morbid, bizarre poetry. This book is whole, completely poetry, with the exquisite horror of their reality. Let it suffice to say that, having in some measure appeased raging thirst, raging, can you imagine raging thirst, how powerful it had to be, the it drive, which consumed us by the blood, by the blood of the victim, and having by common consent taken off the hands, feet, and head, throwing them together with the entrails into the sea, we devoured the rest of the body. We devoured. Again, it's a word. We didn't eat it. We didn't feed on it. We devoured it. We had a repast on it. We devoured the rest of the body piecemeal during the 4 ever memorable days of 17, 18, 19, and 20 of the month. Also, the body lasted them for 4 days. So, as you can see, I'm trying to really put it all together with the effect of Poe's writing. Again, as you can see, the writing style, Poe was an absolute genius when it came to the style of writing, the effect it would bring about. So not only is he using these dark, very powerfully energetic words, he is also poetically arranging them so that the whole book, I think, a very good deal of the book could be recited. I think the thing could be recited as poetry because it really does have that quality of alliteration, for example, in many parts, as I was probably already stressing without mentioning it. With the strong words with very strong accent, was exquisite horror of the reality. It has that quality. So beyond working with it, ego, and superego, the style is also impeccable. Of course, everything that I'm saying here is open to criticism. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Please leave a comment on Facebook or on YouTube, or leave a comment in the seminar. And tomorrow, on 2nd April 2020. So the next part, the second part of the presentation, and the third part of the presentation will be very short, well, comparably quite shorter. So don't worry, it will end soon. The end is nigh. So the collective unconscious. Now the Jungian theory, how does Poe work with that? The cultural transfer and reaction to the white bird, tekelele, the white bird that the there's the Aborigines, that's not a good expression, that the natives of the isle see, and they react to it with shrieks. So to put it in a context, they get saved from the situation. Augustus dies of gangrene because he got wounded in a combat during the mutiny. Well, after the mutiny, after the second mutiny, actually. The point is, only 2 of them survive. Arthur Gordon Pym survives along with Peters, which is his friend, and that will be the third part of the presentation. So these 2 guys survive. They're picked up by a ship that's heading to, again, somewhere around South Pole. And the ship, what it does, it stumbles upon an isle that has native inhabitants. Of course, it's an inhabited island, and everything is in different color. essentially, from what I remember from reading the book, it's everything is in black. They're also very black, the natives. But there's nothing white on the isle. White, that's profane color. Nobody wears anything white. White is seen as something very dangerous. It's seen how shall I say it here? It brings about commotion. People hate it there. White is seen as something very dangerous on the isle, and nobody really knows why. No, but this is not this is not explained to us by Poe. Only at the end of the novel, but when the travelers, the two guys, along with the new crew, but the two guys from the original crew, reach the isle, this is really not explained. There's a cultural exchange, and the thing is that the natives hate white. They hate the white bird, and this is how it really ties to collective unconscious, since over time, as the new crew of the two original protagonists, as they do business with the natives, and they essentially get used to their presence. They used to each other's presence. They live in some sort of symbiosis for a while, I think for a month, and then the native inhabitants decide that would be very expedient to take over the ship and kill all the crew in the process. So basically, they want to take what they want to take over the ship, and the whole symbiosis, the whole business relationship they had with the natives, that was all just a very long ruse. So that's really the context of what I'm about to read. This is during the revolution. This is during the how shall I say, the assault of the ship that's harboring next to the isle, and the narrator, Arthur Gordon Pym, is currently giving us his perspective of what he sees, or rather what he remembers. So, I remember he had given some directions about it just before making the island, and it had been brought into the cabin and stowed away in one of the lockers. Now, what he's talking about is the original captain that's probably dead at this point, since the revolution, it probably had ended, but they're just still pillaging the ship. So the original captain gave some directions, and it had been brought into the cabin, which is the white bird that they shot during their voyage in this direction. And the white bird is stowed away in one of the lockers. So it was in the ship, and the ship is currently being robbed. So it had now been thrown on the shore by the explosion. So the ship explodes, killing about 1,000 of these natives. So, and as if that had not been enough, this white bird is thrown on the shore. But why it had occasioned so much concern among the savages was more than we could comprehend. Although they crowded around the carcass at a little distance, none of them seemed willing to approach it closely. By and by the men with the stakes drew them in a circle around it, and no sooner was this arrangement completed than the whole of the vast assembly rushed into the interior of the island, and with loud screams of Tekelili. Yes, Tekelili. I apologize. How much do I have on our pods? We'll have to finish soon. So, the narrator has no idea why are they so scared, the savages. Why are they so scared of the white body? They crowded around the carcass at a little distance. So this is what also Jung describes in the collective unconscious, and we'll have that quote directly over here. That this can also have a religious connotations. It can be these this experience that is inherited from the ancestors can also be a reason, or let's say, create the basis of several religious ideas that, for example, these tribes can have. And it also can give a rise to a religious ritual, which it probably was in this case, since they crowded around the carcass at a little distance, but none of them wanted to approach it closely. So they inside, perhaps it could be cultural, maybe they have language, maybe they know why, but there is also a very strong instinctual drive not to approach the corpse. And by and by, the men with the stakes drove them in a circle around it. So this is definitely a ritual. So maybe it comes from Poe's experience. Maybe he read about it, but this is essentially what Jung is talking about. There's a ritual around this ritualistic circle around the white corpse, and no sooner was this arrangement completed than the whole of the vast assembly rushed. So we're implied that this is a sort of frenzy. They're running very vigorously into the interior of the island with a loud scream, so they're losing their composure, right? They're not very composed. They scream and running, tekelili, you know? So apparently, this is very much intuitive, very it-driven reaction, I would say. There's definitely ego that's mediating their behavior. They're acting logically. They have perhaps superego. Maybe this is related from the standpoint of superego. Maybe this is related to their beliefs, to the religion of people on the Isles. But this is definitely a very Idian reaction mediated by logical ego. Yeah, if we compare it to Jung, the collective unconscious contains experiences of both human and animal ancestors. This is actually the exact same quote from the beginning. Some of them disturbing, others satisfying, in contrast with Freud's theory, which perceives the unconscious as a potential threat to a person's conscious ego. Jung presents his collective unconscious as a potential source of wisdom in human life. So essentially, get the hell out. Avoid this. This is a bad thing. The white bird is very dangerous. Instinctual reaction combined with, religious ritual, perhaps. Again, it's incredible that Poe is really including this in 19th century. It's almost subconscious reaction. Well, and the third part of the presentation, the last one, yay, is Peters and his shadow. I have to stop it here. Peters and his shadow. Now that's the last part of this presentation. What we want to essentially talk about here is Jung's theory. Again, Jung's theory of collective unconscious and the archetypes. And one of the archetypes in Jung's theory of unconscious, and we, again, just to summarize it and repeat or come back to what we started with, in the collective unconscious and the archetype within that collective unconscious, the shadow, it emphasizes the plasticity of human being, and it represents the animal side in every individual, the tendency towards primitive forms of life typical in our ancestors. The shadow may be seen as Jung's closest parallel to Freud's instinctual side of personality. So the instinctual instinct to, for example, protect the young. It could be an instinct of a mother with a baby to protect it at all costs. That could also be this Idian drive, the shadow, where you're capable of killing someone to protecting your family, for example. It could be one of these things. So how does that reflect in the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym? Well, in Peters and his shadow. Now, Peters is one of, or along with Arthur Gordon Pym, he survives the whole narrative. He's from the original crew that gets slaughtered by the mutiny, which is also a good example of id, and perhaps the mediation of ego. but that's really not, I didn't include it because this is really running for too long. So Peters is a part of the original crew. He is essentially a closest friend of the narrator, Arthur Gordon Pym. He is this very powerful guy. He has lots of muscles. He's not portrayed as very intellectual. He's portrayed as this very bulky, this kind of hunk of a man that that relies mostly on his id drive, on that visceral, on that animalistic energy, on physical violence. Essentially, he's a good warrior. He's an excellent warrior. He's brutal, but he is a friend of Arthur, and he also has, according to the narrator, a softer side to him that is present most of the time. But when it comes to combat, the shadow appears, and he becomes psychopathically cool, and in a sense, animalistically vital, full of life when he slaughters his enemies. So that's what I want to look at in, uh, in the novel when we get to the Isle. Now, on the Isle, now the ship has exploded. There is no way that they're ever going to return to that ship. Everybody's dead, and these two guys, they survive, and they're together again, and they're hiding on the Isle. Now, as they are moving through the Isle, looking for provisions, looking for some food to eat, we get to that. We get to this part. So we had proceeded some 100 yards, and mind you, this is Arthur, again, the narrator, and he might be very unreliable too, right? So we had proceeded some 100 yards, threading our route cautiously between the huge rocks and tumuli, when, upon turning a corner, 5 savages sprung upon us from a small cavern, felling Peters to the ground with a blow from a club. So Peters is incapacitated. As he fell, the whole party rushed upon him to secure their victim, leaving me time to recover from my astonishment. So Arthur gets completely shut down. He's scared, so he gets paralyzed. I still had the musket, but the barrel had received so much injury in being thrown from the precipice that I cast it aside as useless, preferring to trust my pistols, which had been carefully preserved in order. With these I advanced upon the assailants, firing one after other in quick succession. So this type of violence is very ego mediated. Maybe it's really intellectual. I mean, he's calmly trying with certain peace of mind, not really peace of mind, but with a sense of calculation. He takes out his pistols, takes his aim, shoots in a quick succession. There is certain logic to this behavior. It's not so animalistically vital. At least it's not described so. But then 2 savages fell, and one, who was in the act of thrusting a spear into Peters, sprung to his feet without accomplishing his purpose. So Peters is not dead. My companion being thus released, we had no further difficulty. He had his pistols also, but prudently declined using them, confiding in his personal strength. So he prefers his great personal strength, which far exceeded that of any person I have ever known. So this could be a liminal critical situation where Peters essentially turns on, he summons his inner shadow, his great personal strength. Seizing a club from one of the savages who had fallen, he dashed out the brains of the 3 who remained, killing each instantaneously with a single blow of the weapon. Now that's very brutal. Killing each instantaneously with a single blow. That must have been extreme strength, and leaving us completely masters of the field. And how do I know that it passed in this way? Well, exactly after this follows. So rapidly had these events passed, that we could scarcely believe in their reality. So theirs was very rapid, very, again, I'm overusing the word probably, this very rapid, visceral, instinctual, animalistic speed to these things. It happens and you don't know how. It's almost as if your subconscious took over. Your ego is just letting it take the wheel and do things that are necessary for your survival. That which was coded to you through the collective unconscious, through the experience of your ancestors. So it takes over. You don't know what's happening. You kill everyone, and you don't even believe it because that was a critical situation, and your subconscious took over. And you did what you had to do. That we could scarcely believe in their reality, and we're standing over the bodies of the dead in a species of stupid contemplation, as when you do something horrible. Not implying I did, but as when you do something horrible and then you just think about yourself, who am I? What have I done? When we were brought to recollection by the sound of shouts in the distance, it was clear that the savages had been alarmed by the firing and that we had little chance of avoiding discovery. Now compare it with a quote from beginning from Jung, as the visible shadow in bright sunlight emphasizes the realness and plasticity, so we can change very rapidly. Our personality can change under circumstances. So emphasizes the realness and plasticity of human being. So does the archetypal shadow add realness and plasticity to the psyche. So it might happen. The shadow may be seen as Jung's closest parallel to Freud's instinctual side of personality. And that's really, I think, it. It's no pun. That might be it. The instinctual side is used in Arthur Gordon Pym in his narrative in the novel by Edgar Allan Poe. From the previous seminars, we know that this has been at least something that did not escape his literary sensibility, that he was able to observe and perceive these ways of these elements of behavior of human personality. So he had the writer's the writer's eye. He was a good observer, and I think this is really. I think in his choices of words, it's very conspicuous that he uses words like rapid. We had these events transpired that he wants to stress how the subconscious can quickly take over and things happen in a very quick succession. It's very this. This excerpt, this little part is very conspicuous. It very much points to his uh, recognition, of the subconscious and its incredible energetic potential. Because according to Freud, the subconscious id drive that's the energy spring of the personality, right? That's where our motivation comes from. Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his Compensation, says that essentially passion is a great motivator but a bad regulator, right? So, and that's right. I think that I could end this with that quote: that passion is a good motivator but a bad regulator, because this is really what the subconscious theory of subconscious really boils down into, right? We are governed by what we want rather than what we think we want, right? And sometimes it can happen that this shadow comes out, the passion takes over, or it's a passion killing, right? That's another thing to think about. But sometimes we do not really recognize what we do when the shadow comes out. Sometimes we don't know why we do things, but we do them because the collective unconscious dictates us to do that. It's in our bones, it's in our blood, it's in our heritage. And sometimes we really do things unconsciously, and I think that's what I should end with. Yeah, and superego is very important too. It's great if you have strong superego that makes you act not like a savage, apparently in some critical situations, but that doesn't help after so many days on the sea. Here is a image of the tekeluli, most probably the type of bird that they were so afraid of, and the book ends by them going all the way to the South Pole, oh, very close to it actually, and it ends in a fog, and the ending is quite ambiguous. I'm actually going to admit I don't remember whether they die or not. I hope that's something that we can take, that we can and I can take with yourselves out of this presentation. So you will have that handout to your disposal. It's on a Facebook group. It'll probably get sent through the university email. And that's it. So thank you. If you have any questions, if you find anything that doesn't work, if you have anything, please do submit a comment on Facebook, on YouTube, during the seminar, or in whatever way you think it's pertinent to do so. Please do so. I'll be more than happy to discuss it. I mean, this is really the point of it, right? I want to discuss what I prepared here, and I hope that the handout will. It should be useful to you, even if you didn't happen to finish the book, or did not read too much of it. I suppose it will be useful for you as a material to prepare for the final exam. And I mean, it has the quotes, so I hope it was for something. I really did enjoy doing it. It's how I improve my ideas, and I want to bounce them off to you as well, off of you, and learn something ideally from you as well. So thank you.